Yeah, welcome to today's event with Omar Fervati. We will show today forensic architecture's investigation, the murder of Halit Yozgat in the case of the NSU complex. And I'm Len Blaschke. I'm the founder of Little Brother, Brother, and I'm studying media art at the Academy of Fine Arts in Leipzig.
Hi everyone, nice to have you here. My name is Marieke Detmers and I read law at the University of Leipzig here.
Yeah, and this event today takes part in a series of events der Deutsche Sicherheitsapparat, multiples Organversagen, Zivilgesellschaft, Aufarbeitung, Perspektiven. And we were interested in the interdisciplinary approach to civilians, or like how the intelligence services in Germany are working, and how are they not working. And so we had we already had a very nice events with Sebastian Erb, for example, last Monday. He did a very nice yeah, Vortrag to the Hannibal-Netzwerk. And also we had David Werdermann from the Gesellschaft für Freiheitsrechte about the Staatstrojaner, and so on and so on and so on. And yeah, we were looking forward now to talk a little bit with Omar. And before that, Marieke will tell something about forensic architecture in general.
Yes, thank you. So, who is forensic architecture and what do they do in general? So, forensic architecture is a research agency based at Goldsmith at the University of London, and they do investigate human rights violations. So, that includes violations by the state, by police forces, and militaries. And what is special about them, and what will also be seen today, is that in their investigations they use pioneering techniques in spatial and architecture analysis, and therefore they have like a really new aspect of unraveling some facts about happenings, like today at the murder of Halit Yozgat, which will be shown at the documentary. So, in that documentary, they recreate three scenarios of the testimony of Andreas Temme. He is part of the Verfassungsschutz at the time of the murder of Halit Yozgat. He was sitting in the Internetcafé in the next room to where Halit was murdered. And in his testimony, he actually denied being a witness to the murderer. So, in this documentary, they will show us how true actually Andreas Temme's testimony can be, and what maybe should be questioned. So, and the documentary today will be followed by a Q&A by Omar Fervati, and he joined Forensic Architecture in 2017, and afterwards he left to complete his Master of Architecture. And after his graduation in Waterloo in the year 2020, he rejoins Forensic Architecture in the same year. And so, Omar, your aspect of forensic architecture is researching, modeling, and project coordination. So yeah, thank you for being here and for talking about the documentary. So yeah, thanks for being here. And so now we will start with your introduction.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I just wanted to, you gave really good overview. I'll just add a couple ideas that we should keep in mind as we watch this documentary or a short film. The first is that, like was mentioned, FA, Forensic Architecture, works with new spatial tools. It's part of its mandate to develop new research methods to investigate cases of human rights violations. And based on that, I wanted to highlight a couple points. The things that makes this possible, and the thing that continues to motivate the work of agencies and research groups in civil society like forensic architecture. The first is the name forensics in itself, which is that we typically understand forensics as the tool of the state to investigate and determine crimes that occur within civil society. That when something happens within the boundaries and authority of the state, that they will collect evidence and present it in state forums to bring quote unquote justice. What we do is invert that gaze. And actually, for the first time in a way, civil society is looking at the crimes and actions and violations of the states themselves. So this is very important, and particularly in this case, in which the state itself is involved in a form of an investigation, and our work, in a way, is a counter-investigation to that, because it demonstrates and seeks to reveal the failures of the state's investigation and questionable presence at the scene of murder, at the scene of the crime itself, by a state agent, Andreas Temme. And to begin to question how that investigation unfolded, their involvement or their awareness and response to the murders carried out by the NSU, this group of 3 neo-Nazi terrorists that killed more than 9 people, 10 people between 2000 and 2007 in Germany. So keep that in mind, the idea of that counter-forensic. But not only do we need to do to counter the investigations, to counter the narrative of the state, but we also need to present this work oftentimes in counter forums, meaning where do you present the work of a counter-forensic investigation? If it's not in the court, the state court, oftentimes it has to be taken to the public. In this particular case, to just give you some background of this case, Halit Yozgat was murdered in April 6th, 2006, at his family-run internet cafe in Kassel, Germany. And his death was the 9th of 10 murders committed by the NSU between 2000 and 2007. And at the time of his killing, like we've mentioned before, intelligence officer Andreas Temme was present. But in the months and years that followed, more than a dozen parliamentary inquiries and Germany's longest post-war criminal trial exposed a shocking extent to which Germany's security services were aware and in constant contact with many supporters of the NSU itself. Those revelations showed us something that was dubbed the NSU complex, the structural racism entrenched in the institutions and the blindness of those institutions, willful and otherwise, by the state, that ignored the situated knowledge and experience of the country's immigrant communities who were suffering at the hands of groups like the NSU, and how they failed to apprehend this violent terror cell. So in November 2016, a decade after the murder, at that time, there was a series of leaks by the state police files that showed evidence and logs from the internet cafe of that day. Forensic architecture was asked by a collection of civil society organizations known as Unraveling the NSU Complex. So this was a civil society organization asking forensic architecture to investigate that, and we held this work not only in exhibitions in multiple venues, but also in a citizens' tribunal. In a way, that citizens' tribunal speaks to the continuation of the counter-forensics, because not only is there a need for civil society to investigate the actions of the state, but also to present in alternative methods by our own ways of investigation, which we have limited access to information, and in alternative forums. So presenting to the public in a citizens' tribunal about and to find the truth of what happened that day when Halit Yozgat was murdered. So last I'll say is that Temme claims that he did not see, hear, or smell anything, that he didn't see anyone and didn't see Halit at all. And our investigation shows that this could not be the case, And it raises larger questions again about the NSU complex, how the state handled that investigation of Halit and the NSU as a whole. So I think we'll have more questions and a deeper discussion after the film, but I think this should give a good insight about understanding our methods and our approach. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just one question. No, not one question. There's just one hint. If you don't have a Google or YouTube account, we have a chat room on our webpage. Carl in the in the background, he will post the link in the commentaries in the comments, and then you can join there just with the account name and the password, and yeah, write it down there if you don't have a Google and YouTube account. So now we will watch the short film.
Should we say that the German version is available online as well?
Yeah, but it's already starting.
Oh, okay. Great.
Thanks.
Shortly after 5 p.m., on the 6th of April, 2006, Halit Yozgat was found dead behind the counter of his family-run internet café in Holländische Straße 82, Kassel, Germany. This was the 9th in a series of 10 killings targeting mainly migrant communities across Germany between 2000 and 2007. The perpetrators were later identified as members of the National Socialist Underground, or the NSU, a neo-Nazi group whose core allegedly consisted of 3 people. The only surviving member of those 3, Beate Zschäpe, currently faces a criminal trial in Munich. During the police investigation into the Kassel murder, it emerged that an intelligence agent of the state of Hesse named Andreas Temme was present at the shop around the time of the murder. He did not disclose this fact to the police, but was later identified from his internet records. In 2015, many of the police records documenting this investigation were leaked. Police reports, witness testimonies, computer and phone logs, and site photographs were made public. Amongst these files was a crucial piece of evidence, a police video showing Andreas Temme's reenactment of his visit to the shop. He sought to demonstrate how he had missed seeing the body of Halit as he exited the shop. Forensic Architecture was commissioned by the People's Tribunal, a civil society initiative working with the families of the victims, to investigate the validity of Temme's testimony. What time did the murder happen? Where was Temme at that time? Could he not have witnessed the incident? Could Temme's testimony and reenactment be truthful? If not, larger questions could be asked. Working from leaked photographs of the crime scene, we constructed a digital model of the internet cafe. Within those 77 square meters, different actors, the victim, his killers, and a state employee were architecturally disposed in relation to each other. The shop was thus a microcosm for the larger political controversy that ensued. We reduced the model into its most relevant elements and built it as a full-scale installation at the House of World Cultures in Berlin. We then undertook a series of experiments within both the physical and the digital models. Because the murder took place in an internet cafe, every witness was connected to a time-coded device, a computer, or a phone. We located each digital device in the model and constructed a timeline from the login data. This created the space-time matrix within which different possible events could take place. At about 16:30, Halit Yozgat was alone at the counter. The first to come in was 16-year-old Ahmed. He saw Halit at the counter, paid him for half an hour internet access, and went to the back room where the computers were located. He sat at PC 7. At 16:46:03, he logged in and started to play Call of Duty, a popular World War II themed game where players shoot Nazis. The second to enter the shop was 14-year-old Emre. He also paid Halit and went to the back room. Emre sat at PC 3. At 16:48:58, he logged in. He had also come to the cafe to play Call of Duty. The third person to walk in was Hadiya and her 3-year-old daughter. She sat at the telephone booth between the two rooms. She would make 2 phone calls that afternoon. Phone logs record the start of a call within the minute and the end of a call within a second. The last person to go to the back room and log into a computer was intelligence agent Andreas Temme. He said that he parked his car directly in front of the internet cafe. He then entered, saw Halit at the counter, and went directly to the back room. He sat at PC 2. At 16:50:56, he logged into the dating site ilove.de. His username, Wildman70, was what later revealed his presence in the internet cafe. He logged out at 17:01:40 and took 1 minute and 7 seconds to exit the shop according to his reenactment. The last person to enter the shop was Faiz. He was the last person to speak to Halit. He was also the only person to have been in the room when the killing took place. Faiz made 2 phone calls that afternoon. His first call started at 16:54. And his second finished at 17:03:26. When Faiz entered his phone booth, Halit was alive. When he exited, roughly 9.5 minutes later, Halit was already fatally shot. All witnesses present at the shop heard these distinct sounds. Temme was the only one to have told the police that he didn't perceive any exceptional noises. Where was Andreas Temme when the shots were fired? His position in space might suggest his level of culpability. There are 3 possibilities. He could have been in the back room, in the front part of the shop, or he could have already left the shop. Scenario 1. Could the murder have happened after Teme had already left the internet cafe? Andreas Teme logged out of his computer at 17:01:40. According to his reenactment, it took 1 minute and 7 seconds for him to look for Halit, place a coin on the counter, and exit the shop. This leaves 39 seconds from the time Teme entered his car to when Faiz finished his call and left his booth. Is it possible that the murder happened within these 39 seconds? We measured if 39 seconds is long enough for the necessary sequence of actions to take place. We reenacted the following sequence. Andreas Teme leaves the internet cafe. And enters his car just missing Halit. Halit walks back to the shop. He sits at the counter The killer comes in, shoots twice, turns around, and leaves. Faiz finishes his call and exits his booth. We combine these actions in a highly coordinated and controlled experiment in which each action immediately and seamlessly followed the other. This sequence amounted to 35 seconds. In a real-life situation, however, there would need to be sufficient time gaps between the separate actions for the characters to miss each other. Our reenactment establishes that those gaps could not add up to more than 4 seconds without some of the characters or events overlapping. This fact renders the scenario very unlikely. What makes this scenario even less likely is the fact that Halit would have had to be out of the shop when Teme was looking for him, and back at his counter before the murderer came in. However, with 5 customers inside, it is unlikely that he would leave the shop. Furthermore, no witnesses reported seeing Halit outside. Foreclosing this possibility altogether are the call logs of other witnesses. Hadiya testified that she heard the sounds of the gunshots after she began her second phone call. The connection came immediately then. I suddenly heard 3 sounds. 3 times it went tack, 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 quickly one after the other, as if somebody was knocking against the wall of the room. Faiz testified, around the time of the first call, I heard something like a balloon exploding. I was busy entering the PIN from the maxi card. I tried to look through the slot on the side. According to his testimony, the shots were fired before his second phone call went through. Faiz is the only one that saw the killer. For a short moment I noticed somebody going in or out. I think the person went out. His face I couldn't see. He was looking towards the table. He was in a hurry. These testimonies reduce the possible time of the murder to between 17:01:00, the earliest Hadiya could have started her second call, and 17:02:00, the latest Faiz could have started his. The evidence thus discounts scenario 1, in which Andreas Teme had left the internet cafe by the time of the murder. Scenario 2. Could Andreas Temme have been in the front part of the shop at the time of the murder? As mentioned, Andreas Temme logged out at 17:01:40 and took 1 minute and 7 seconds to exit. According to Faiz's and Hadiya's testimony, it is possible that the killing took place within the first 20 seconds after Andreas Temme logged out. This possibility is supported by the testimony of Ahmed, who could see Temme from his seat. Ahmed claims to have seen Temme coming in with a plastic bag. It was not fully packed, but something was in there. I believe it was rather heavy, pulling it down. The police thought that it might have been the gun. He also claims to have heard the sounds of the gunshots after Andreas Temme left PC2. I had been on the internet for 15 minutes when I suddenly heard a muffled sound. In my opinion, it came from the direction of the entrance area. It was very loud and sounded as if something had fallen to the ground. I am very sure that it was not more than 2 minutes after the man had passed me. If the murder happened within the 20 seconds after Temme logged out, he would have still been in the shop according to his reenactment, and possibly colluded with the murderer. Scenario 3. We examine the possibility that the killing took place when Andreas Temme was still sitting at PC2. This scenario agrees with witness testimonies and is endorsed by the court in Munich. However, Temme said that he didn't hear the shots, that he didn't smell any gunpowder, and that he didn't see Halit's body behind the counter when he left. To check these claims, we undertook 3 sensory tests. To test whether Temme could have heard the gunshots from his position at PC2, we contracted weapons experts in Arizona to fire and record the sound of a Czeska 83, the murder weapon, using the same ammunition. The experts recorded a series of gunshots.
This is the CZ, no suppressor.
They then compared them to the sound signature of 3 other guns of similar caliber. The weapons all generated equivalent peak sound signatures ranging from 157 to 158.5 decibels. Out of those guns of the same caliber, the Colt 32 was threaded with different sound suppressors to simulate the suppressor used in the crime.
This is the Colt 32 with a wet suppressor.
None of the gunshots were suppressed below 130 decibels. In Berlin, we placed a loudspeaker at the position of the killer. Together with acoustic experts, we played the recorded gunshots in the physical model and tested whether Temme could have been able to hear the shots from his position at PC2.
Measurement 1, high-level gunshot. Start now. Measurement end. Measurement 2, gunshot. Start now. Measurement end.
The sound at PC2 was clearly audible. We then simulated the gunshot within our digital model. In order to corroborate the results, we repeated the experiment within a digital model of the physical installation in Berlin. The data from both the physical and the digital tests confirmed that the sound level at Andreas Temme's position at PC2 was between 94 to 99 decibels at maximum level. This is 40 to 50 decibels above the maximum ambient sound level that can be expected in such a space. For an eighth of a second, the volume of the shot would be as loud as a jackhammer and would have been clearly audible by Andreas Temme. When leaving the internet cafe, a few seconds after the killing, Andreas Temme would have passed through a cloud of residual smell from spent gunpowder. We tested whether he would be able to perceive it. We simulated the volume of gases produced by the CZ-83 gunshots. A digital simulation established the particle dispersal and the latency of smell. Whether Temme would have been able to smell the residual gunpowder depends on the chemical composition of the powder, on the concentration of particles within this cloud, and whether the gun was fired openly or through a plastic bag. The model simulated the fluid dynamics of airborne ammonia particles resulting from two Browning 7.65 mm bullets shot openly. The cloud marks the aerosols that are at a higher concentration than the common threshold of perception. This simulation suggests that if the shots were fired 20 seconds or less before Temme logged out, he would have been able to smell the ammonia as he moved through the front room. We then investigated whether Andreas Temme could have seen the body of Halit as he exited the internet cafe. Andreas Temme claimed that he did not see the body as he left a coin on the front desk. Aided by motion detection software and analog measures, we recreated Temme's police reenactment digitally to establish his moving cone of vision. We repeated this test in the physical model with a camera attached to the head of an actor. Witness testimony places the body in this position. We also tested for other positions in which Halit could have fallen. All body positions would have been visible to Andreas Temme as he bent over the counter. Out of the three scenarios, we have determined that scenario 1, in which the murder took place after Andreas Temme left the Internetcafé, is not possible. The evidence does not exclude scenario 2, in which Andreas Temme was at the front part of the shop when the murder took place. Scenario 3, in which the murder took place while Andreas Temme was still sitting at PC2, is also possible. In this case, he would have witnessed the event. This story suggested layers of violence, misrepresentations, and cover-ups. Halit Yozgat was murdered on the 6th of April, 2006. 20 days later, Andreas Temme reenacted his experience of the event. We reenacted Temme's reenactment to discover it was yet another act of violence, potentially a crime in its own right. Halit's father, Ismail Yozgat, repeatedly asked the court to no avail to visit the shop. If you conducted an inspection of the shop, you would be better able to see for a fact that Temme is making up stories. There are two possibilities. Either Mr. Temme himself killed my son, or he noticed whoever it was who killed him. But the state no longer considers Temme a suspect. This, together with the reluctance to unravel the NSU complex, amounts to the continuation of violence by other means.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing the investigative short film with us. And following, we will come to the Q&A now. And we will start with a basic question. And it is, how does forensic architecture start their investigations in general?
Oh, we lost Omar.
I think so. Omar?
Are you still there?
I don't.
Yeah,
Oh,
we can't
Yes,
see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah, we can hear you, but you are not being seen by us.
how about now?
Yeah,
Yes.
there you are back. Okay, I'll just start the question again.
Yeah.
It is a basic one to start with, and it is following, how does forensic architecture start their investigations in general? So how do you begin with a project?
The funny thing is that there's no two projects that I think that are alike in terms of the strategy of if you're talking about like how to approach or how to begin the actual research. But I think generally speaking, it begins with outlining the questions at hand, quickly understanding what material is available and not available to us, and then understanding what skill sets we need and whether we can do it within the office, or in this case, we relied, as you saw, on like a large collaboration with lawyers, with fluid dynamics experts, with acoustics experts and engineers to be able to reconstruct and understand these things. So I think those kinds of collaborations come out from us asking what needs to be investigated, and then knowing kind of like what questions we can answer and can't answer. So that is just a general framework of how we might begin on outlining the general questions, understanding the material available, and then seeing what skills we need and to have at our disposal to do that. But there's no like formula.
Not a formula to start with everything at the same way. So, considering forensic architecture, how long did it take you to finish that project?
It's been a while since we worked on this one, but and I think this project was between 6 months to a year long. Yeah, it took a while to do that, and like you saw, we reconstructed physically, digitally. So there was a lot of experiments to do. Mhm.
There.
Yeah, I have one question because you said like you have like you first of all you start the investigation or like how to create the questions about the material. You have material, and then you can start the forensics. Like, and in one interview with your with Eyal Weissman, he said like he wants to change the aesthetics, like things were not seen, but then they become a part of the investigation. And like for example, in the Beirut thing, there's like you invited a guy who was like destruct like yeah he was taking a look at the smoke color and stuff like this. So and what was the first thing you had this leaked material in the case of Andreas Tembe, in the case of the murder of Halit Yozgat, and how was it? What was the first question when you started to look on the material, and what was the most confusing thing, maybe?
I think so first you were asking what was the question that we began with in that one, you mean? You're asking like what did we begin with? What question did we start with in that one as well?
Yeah. What was the when you took the first look at the material?
Okay.
In this case, yeah.
Yeah. So in this one, like as you know, we were commissioned or asked to, not commissioned. We were asked to investigate this by the NSU Citizens Tribunal which is a truth commission to understand like what happened. So the question I think that we began with, and the material begins to ask, is to establish the series of events, to establish the possibilities of what happened, and to see, as like was one of the first questions posed in the film as well, is to understand if the testimony that Andreas Temme gave was truthful, and to what extent was he involved, or could we see what possibilities of his involvement was. So I think the most difficult thing was because you see like in the material, there's like phone logs, internet logs, testimonies about what someone says they heard and what someone says they did. His own testimony, Andreas Temme's testimony, as well as his reenactment video. You begin to have to grapple with how these things could have unfolded in time. And I think the most challenging thing is understanding and creating these scenarios, designing and testing what could have happened, and then kind of dividing these kinds of experiments as sub questions. Was he in a cafe at all? Had he left, as he claims? Was he in the front of the room or not? So these kinds of three scenarios begin to then beg different questions of, okay, how would we know if he was there or not? Well, we have to see what senses he could have been exposed to. And then there's a question of the timing. Even if that happened, could it have been possible given all these other circumstances? So FA typically works with a lot of disparate, different, and disconnected material. We often look at open source material. In this case, this was a leak. Other times it might be on social media, where on their own, maybe they don't tell you anything. Where when someone logged in and out on its own doesn't tell you much, but it's about the corroboration and beginning to layer those things over time that you might be able to see patterns, to test the testimonies, and to begin to establish truths and new questions sometimes that come out of something that you didn't expect. So I think the element of the time and the corroboration of events is definitely the most delicate in this work.
Okay, I'll get right to the next question.
Thanks.
So thank you. And so it's an additionally one. So what you just explained sounds like a lot of effort and time going on into that project. And we were wondering, so you were contacted by the Alliance of Civil Societies Organizations known as Unraveling the NSU Complex. And so you took I called it like the case, and you started investigating. But why did you feel the urge in doing so? Did you feel like there was like missing a part of unraveling the situation, like where the state should have done it? So why did you think you had to add your part to it and start looking for the truth in this case?
I think for this case and for many other cases that forensic architecture might decide to take on, it's a question of, there's two questions kind of that we have to grapple with. The first is the one of what questions are unanswered and the political significance of your contribution. And so the question of like what's unanswered, you have to ask, what do we, with our skill set, with our methods, with our spatial understanding, and with our ability to put together a lot of collaborations of different experts in this one space, what could that bring to this case? For this particular instance, the questions that were left are temporal and spatial. And so as architects, as people that could reconstruct a space and begin to test events in space and time, to test that kind of like testimony by Temme, to also understand maybe what could have happened to Halit Yozgat in relationship to everyone else in the cafe, then we expect, or we understand, that we may be able to add new information that may otherwise not have been available. So testing and finding that his testimony was false occurred because of our investigation and because we see the opportunity that spatial analysis begins to answer that. The other question, the political one, is also to understand that you want to be, of course, you always want to be a part of answering those questions. And if you have the ability and the skills and the questions are applied to you and your skill set, then you have a significant opportunity to bring political truth, to bring public truth. And that's also the kind of mandate of what we're trying to do. It's people, or it's like a civilian organization or agency that's constantly trying to understand questions left by the state or caused by the state in an effort for public truth. And this is a case, especially with marginalized people in Germany, and at the hands or the interconnectedness with a terror organization like the NSU and the state brings a huge significance and necessity for us as civil society to begin to ask and investigate on our own.
Thank you. Do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah, I would take the first question from the comment from the chat. Is there a case where you still convinced the official version is not correct, but you simply can't prove it with your methods?
Sorry, say that last part again. Is there
a case where you still convinced the official version is not correct, but you simply can't prove it with your methods?
Like other cases? I think sometimes there's, I can't think of like something off the top of my head, but sometimes there's like unanswered questions or things left over in investigations that, you know, you have your limitations as civil society on what you can investigate. Let's say even in this particular one, we can't there's things that we can prove and things that we cannot prove. For example, we don't know the connection or intention or actions before and after that event by Andreas Temme or the state agents. But we can look at the contradictions and claims made by the state and him. So we can see that his testimony is incorrect. But at the end of the day, sometimes those questions that get left behind aren't sometimes that you need the state in themselves to answer or put pressure for them to answer, meaning we're not going to know what he was doing there, but now we demand that they answer that question of what was he doing there. So I think there's always unanswered or open questions in cases, maybe sometimes larger questions about the involvement of the state or others. But also in general, in terms of like, we couldn't figure that something we thought we were going to figure out, and we still feel like that's the case. I think that can happen too, maybe depending on the availability and limitations of media. But that would also be something that we would assess at the beginning to see, is the media enough for us to do an analysis on this or not? And so sometimes when we can't take a case, it's sometimes because of that.
Okay. I guess it's always hard to decide whether you can actually like validate something more with the methods you have. So we'll get to the next question, which is also similarly asked in the chat. And what is the public impact of your investigations? So does it make people aware, for example, of police brutality or somehow of undemocratic machinations?
Undemocratic imaginations?
Like,
what was that last one?
No, it means like undemocratic happenings or like agitations from the state.
I see. Yeah, I think there has been a lot of changes or pressure put on by these kinds of investigations. And even in this one, look, I mean, we weren't allowed to talk in the court case of behauptet, habe, or in the trial of the NSU killings, but our investigation and the citizens tribunal that was carried out by the people that asked us to do that necessitated and put pressure on the government to release new evidence, and that's what you saw at the end. There was like new evidence released by the state, and to make a statement about it. That means there is pressure and changes done because of these works. In other cases, it can have more direct impact. For example, in Israel, there's been multiple cases in which forensic architecture has actually presented in courts, or our work has been presented in courts and has led to cases being won because of that evidence produced. So sometimes it's a matter of, like was said, education or public truth, meaning that you can present this work in exhibitions where there's like an awareness or kind of the public knowledge being a pressure onto the state. Sometimes it's a direct question or to the state itself, and then other times it can be a concrete, direct court appearance or evidence presented. So it takes different forms, but it has an impact in all those forums, from the cultural to the legal forums.
That I was wondering about how does forensic architecture sees their role in society. So do you think that you are like kind of a counterpart to the state investigation, but out of the civil society? So do you mean do you understand what I mean by that? So do you think that you are a part of the society taking action where the state actually should take action?
Yeah, I think we would consider our role as a civil organization, a civil agency, working with other members of civil society, oftentimes the people we work for. And sometimes, in some cases, we may take a case on our own. In some cases, someone might come and ask us, but it's always concerned with and works often with the civil society in itself, meaning the members of victims, of organizations that are speaking on behalf of victims, and it's making claims about narratives of states violence, of corporate violence, and etc., as you mentioned, including police violence. So it works, like I said at the beginning, to counter or to question and challenge the dominant narrative and assumptions that are made by the state. A lot of times that we hear, like, I think it's like interesting that, you know, when a state like makes a statement on an event, we take it kind of as a truth, because it seems that with their overwhelming advantage of knowledge above civil society, that they would know better. But in some cases, our investigations would show that when they make claims, either they're either completely false or misled or just factually incorrect when you begin to corroborate the facts of the ground on the ground. So that you can have that kind of like variation, and to also begin to challenge the kinds of the authority of those kinds of statements or claims and narratives. Thanks. On behalf of civil society. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very complex. No, I was thinking now that like the methods you like reconstruct cases, or like how you use the public material. This also leads to maybe to another question, like in general, like for states or governments, that if you use this counterforensics, that somehow, like, could you imagine that there could be more forensic architectures in the world, or should be there just one forensic architecture, or you know what I mean? What my question is, like,
Yeah,
because
I think.
could you
Sorry, go
say,
ahead.
yeah, could you say, like, the like to give this methods to to the civil society in general, like do workshops or something, like and then, like, yeah, stuff like this.
That's a great question. I mean, personally, I would love and dream of these kinds of works being done all over the world because, as a single agency, you can only take on so much. There's not only the question of what you can prove and can't prove, but there's also a limitation in people, resources, and so on. But there are already some organizations that do that. In France, there's an organization, sister organization to forensic architecture, called Index. In New York, there's an organization, for example, called what's it called? Um, yeah, I just forgot it. But there's other organizations that have begun to take spatial investigations, and now I think inspired by this turn of use of open source analysis and spatial reconstruction, some media organizations have also kind of opened new units within them to do that kind of investigation, like New York Times, or have like begun not doing necessarily what we're talking about, but something very close in terms of like understanding events through media and space. But in terms of workshops, also, like we do workshops to civil society on many occasions. I've done a few myself, and I think it's also being introduced in some schools, and that hopefully will lead to more independent investigations or new groups doing that. But absolutely, I think there shouldn't be one. There should be as many as possible, as the tools are at the disposal of whoever can ask and answer those questions. And it's about collaborations, I think. Architects with lawyers, artists, media, filmmakers, and so on, can lead to many new investigations that fill in the gaps of the truth.
Promising intersectional collaboration. We're going to ask some more questions from the chat now. How does the forensic architecture get the necessary financial capacity to work on projects like this? So by that means, did you get any financial support by the German state?
No. I mean, sometimes, I'm not, as a researcher, I don't know every single like accounting that happens, but generally speaking, forensic architecture, is resources are kind of divided into a couple branches. One is it's a research agency in a university, so there's some support by that university in terms of like facility, like being there. There's also research grants and art grants and investigation grants, that are sometimes public grants, meaning that they might be connected to larger institutions or institutional bodies, but that don't dictate what you do with that. You know what I mean? So you might apply for a grant and you might get some grants so that you have the freedom to do investigations on your own as well. Other times, and when the victims themselves come to you and they don't have the resources to do that, other times you might be commissioned and paid to do something. Of course, we would only take those on if we are interested in the political questions and agree with the kind of goal. And so maybe a human rights organizations like that we've worked with before include like Amnesty International or Human Rights Watch that might say, we want to investigate this question, and maybe they would pay for that. So there's these kinds of avenues that allow for variations and flexibility in a phase like mandate. Was there another part of that question, or is that the main thing? But there was no money from the German state. I'm sure they don't want us to do that.
Yeah, okay. You could say the Haus der Kultur in der Welt was supporting you and giving you a space.
Maybe, yeah, that's right. Is that a public institution? I mean, that's what I mean. Maybe it's like maybe there are times in which like there's indirect indirect or indirect funding. But let's say that could lead back to like one bigger institution, but it won't be like the police asking us. You know what I mean? This is kind of more closely to what I'm talking about, like the state agents investigating themselves. Yeah.
Okay, the next question from the little brother chat leads in another direction again. From C. Do you see ways to prove that some investigating institution influence some investigations intentionally in a specific direction rather than because of incapability?
I don't fully understand that because of so our investigations are influencing something directly, or
I can repeat it. Maybe I haven't read it before.
do you get it?
Yes, exactly. I see you typing now. Do you see ways? Do you see ways to prove that some investigating institution influence some investigations intentionally in a specific direction rather than because of incapability?
What is an investigating institution? That's my question.
Oh, okay, how to prove
Is that the state?
He wrote how to prove that an organization acted intentionally.
Like the state, for example.
For example, yeah.
Or the police.
Or the police.
Or the police acted intentionally. So intention is an interesting question. I think oftentimes we don't need, and we're not concerned with defining or even able to ask or answer the intentions, meaning we don't know if they didn't investigate properly the NSU complex because they're incompetent or whether there is a direct connection. The NSU complex advocates that were speaking about the NSU complex, I think we're talking about that they knew something that maybe they didn't disclose, that they knew more than they made it sound. So those things I think come out of public pressure, like those kinds of answers about the NSU complex, about the state's involvement with the NSU killings, came out of public pressure leading to parliamentary inquiries in courts and in parliaments. And so then you begin to get answers. Now, what leads to the public pressure is often those investigations. So we don't ourselves have to know. Again, we don't need to know or guess the intentions and actions, that's motivations of Andreas Temme. All we need to know or ask is to say, what you said was not right. And the state has a responsibility to the public to tell us the truth. And we don't know the truth about that. We know the truth about his statement being false and the possibility of what could have happened. So there's establishing public truth has to be grounded in the spatial analysis, the facts of what we know. But that leads to political questions and political claims that civil society demands of the state to answer. We don't need to answer it for them, but we need to create enough truth or doubt about the claims that they were making so that they are forced to answer us. So there are still questions, and the fact that he was no longer a suspect is outrageous, right? Now that we see that you expect or you would want for them to investigate or to continue investigating their own institutions and their own agents in that. I hope that begins to answer that question.
So now we're going to ask the last two questions of the chat, and we're going to begin with like a general questions. How did people from government institutions react to your publication?
Yeah, there was a lot of press about that. I don't recall every single reaction to that, but I remember that there was, I mean, the fact that when you get a reaction from an institution or a government, that tells you that there is pressure. I mean, I think for me, that's already the first success on that front, because there is doubts raised about the narratives. I think generally speaking, they try to, from what I understood, because this kind of saga happened when I wasn't there for a brief period. But there was discrediting the information, or to say that the evidence wasn't full, and then that's when they released additional information. But even with that additional information, it actually proves even more what we were saying, that he must have been present at the time of the killing. So the other scenarios we know they're not true now. So he was definitely there, which means he was definitely a witness, according to our experiments. And he says he didn't witness in any form. So it kind of opens up new avenues of investigation, but it also reaffirms questions that we already had, meaning he was there, and why did you tell us you didn't witness when there's no way that you couldn't have?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, there's only one question left from Milan Nadim. How does forensic architecture handle uncertainties in the analysis, e.g., the hearing or smelling capacities of Andreas? Do you evaluate them as too small to be important?
How do we determine the smelling capacity? Is that the question?
I think the question is how do you handle like uncertainties? So because you can never be completely sure what Andreas actually said or what he did smell. So how do you evaluate such uncertainties? Did this make the question any clearer to you?
I think so. So, I mean, for that one, for let's say for the smell, or when there's like other uncertainties about whether he did perceive or didn't perceive, um, that's an example of the question being raised maybe by us, or trying to fit it within the space and time in which that happened. But then we relied on experts, like fluid dynamics experts, to say if this shot was fired at in this window of time, maybe that's just what they're providing us with, and then we would provide the movement of him according to his reconstruction. So it's kind of like bringing multiple expertise together. And in that particular instance, it's not going to say that how much did he smell, or to completely answer that question, but to say if he walked through that cloud, then he would have smelled something, because it was above the threshold and it has a distinct smell, and he's a trained agent. Like, he's not just a random person. So this is someone that would have been familiar with that already. So I think it's also about the accumulation. So it's not just about one uncertainty, but when there's doubts, when we looked at every piece of witnessing, so the witnessing by sight of the body, witnessing by hearing, witnessing by smell, in each one there's a doubt, but together they raise a doubt on the larger idea, which is, were you a witness or not? And if you didn't see it, you either smelt it or heard it. And it kind of like, even if you eliminate one, the others persist. So I hope that's answering. If not, like, let me know. But
Yeah, it
I
is.
think that's
The person just said correct, so I think
correct. Thank you.
there's some content. So
Great. Yeah.
I think we will come to an end now as well. So I just want to say like a great thank you for being here tonight or this evening. It's a little bit earlier where you are, and thank you for answering all the questions with such a patience and such a detail. Yeah, I really liked the documentary or the investigative short film as well. I think it was an excellent work. And yeah, do you want to add something, Len?
Oh yeah, yes. Just one. Maybe you can answer it very fast or short. What actually? On what case are you working on actually right now? Is there something we can wait for?
I mean, there's a couple cases that have just been released that you can see that I was working on for the past also like 6 months or more. The first just came out like yesterday, and it's called environmental violence in Louisiana. If you go to the Forensic Architecture page, it's like the first one right now. And it's like also a long form. It's like also like 35 minutes or something. And it's investigating pollutants. It's a more of an environmental violence. And it's an example of like the variations of where forensic architecture can act. So that's an environmental case looking at the pollutants by petrochemical companies in Louisiana across historically Black communities that are kind of sandwiched in between, and then also beginning to understand where historically unmarked graves of formerly enslaved people in Louisiana could be and how there might be building on them. So that's one. And then the other one was one called European Arms and the Bombing of Yemen. It's like right next to it, also just came out. And this was done in collaboration with ECCHR based in Berlin, and other organizations, including Bellingcat, Yemeni Archive, and so on. And it looks at the patterns and correlation between European arms exports and actions and the bombings and war crimes happening in Yemen on behalf of the Saudi Emirati coalition. So that's more of a platform, interactive, so you understand the relationship of multiple European companies on the ground.
Thank you for answering this question as well. And I just wanted to deliver like thanks from the chat as well. And people are thanking you for your work and for the perfect explanation.
Thank you.
To the answers. And also from us, we wish you like a lot of success with your future works and the present ones. And just big thank you for your investigative work, I guess.
Yes.
So
thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. This was an excellent event. I look forward to hearing more about what Little Brother does. And yeah, and I think there's it's also one thing of interest might be that we also just launched a new initiative in Germany called the Investigative Commons in Berlin with collaboration with multiple organizations, including ECCHR. So you'll probably hear more from them soon.
Okay,
cool.
We are really looking forward to hearing from that.
Yeah.
So,
thank you.
Well, another thank you, and have a nice evening.
Much.
And
take care.
Goodbye to everyone. And
thank you for the great questions.
Yeah, thank you. We'll see us.
Goodbye. Have a nice evening in London.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.